After 14 years of waiting and IVF treatments, my husband Corey and I had our beautiful daughter Arabella. We loved being parents and always knew we wanted 3 children, so we went through IVF again. In the heartbreak of failed transfers, miscarriages, we almost gave up. But after all the ups and downs, we were elated to find out we were pregnant with twins. We asked Arabella if she wanted a brother or a sister, and she replied both. We knew it was meant to be. There were several complications during my high-risk pregnancy, but most concerning was our baby girl's diagnosis of intrauterine growth restriction. Her placenta was not getting enough nutrients or blood flow, and she was measuring under 1%. Although we live in Georgia, I was put on bed rest at the hospital in Florida because it was adjoining to the closest children's hospital with a NICU for when the twins were born. After a month in the hospital, labor started progressing, and at 34 weeks, I had an emergency C-section due to Amelia's intrauterine growth restriction and her brother's breech position. Our bouncing baby boy, Christian, was almost 5 pounds, and our sweet little angel girl, Amelia, weighed 3 pounds, 4 ounces. After a 42-day stay in the NICU and living at the Ronald McDonald House in order to be close to our babies, we were all finally back home in Georgia and so very happy. Our long-awaited completed family but unfortunately only stayed completed for 7 weeks. Amelia was teeny, but she was seen at all her wellness checks with no cause for concern. We thought everything was okay. But on October 1st, 2023, we noticed Amelia had a swollen thigh and rushed her to the emergency room. That's where our nightmare began. We were told our baby had a broken femur and that we needed to bring her to the Children's Hospital, the same Florida hospital that she had just been discharged from 7 weeks prior. There, we let the doctors know she was a twin who suffered from intrauterine growth restriction. We told them all about her NICU stay, medical history, and my pregnancy complications. They didn't want to hear any of it. After being up for 24 hours straight, we were questioned by the child abuse pediatrician. Apparently, Amelia also had healing rib fractures. I repeatedly asked the CAP to see the x-rays and CAT scan, but was never shown them. I asked her to tell me the age of the fractures so I could see if they took place in NICU, but she said there was no way of knowing, just that Amelia had several rib fractures in various stages of healing. I was hysterical. It seemed like every time the doctors came in the room, they were telling us something new was wrong with our baby. The CAP now said Amelia also had a stage 3 liver laceration and was bleeding internally. She said the only way this injury could have occurred was if Amelia was punched repeatedly or drop-kicked across the room. I was in a state of shock at that point. I asked why Amelia had no bruising or any other signs of pain or discomfort, but the CAP said there was not always bruising. I asked if my baby was going to have surgery, and the CAP said she didn't know. I asked again, how old is this injury? Could this have happened in the NICU or at birth? Again, she said there was no way of telling, but she'd go ask the radiologist immediately and get back to me on the timeline of the injury and if surgery was going to be needed. I never saw her again. We didn't know it at the time, but this CAP had made headlines in 2 prior states. And now this CAP was in Florida, making headlines again. My husband stepped out to get us dinner, and I was breastfeeding Amelia when a Department of Family Children's Service worker and a male security guard came into the hospital room and told me we were being removed from the hospital. They said all of our children had been taken into state custody. My baby literally was ripped from my arms while I was feeding her. I was told to gather my belongings, and I was escorted out by security. I cried so loudly through the hallways that everyone started coming out of their rooms to see what was going on. There were no injuries or signs of abuse at all for Arabella or Christian. Georgia Department of Family Children Services claimed our twins couldn't be released to family because Amelia needed specialized medical care. Yet there were no specialized medical care instructions with her discharge paperwork, except to specify a certain way she should be picked up. There were no discharge instructions or follow-up on this possible liver laceration, and Amelia was never seen by a hematologist or a surgeon at Children's Hospital. The twins were placed in foster care, but the foster parent had no specialized medical training. At only 3 years old, Arabella was questioned alone during an almost 2-hour forensic interview. She came out a different little girl, having panic attacks, saying she was never going to see her mommy and daddy again. Arabella was fortunately placed with my mother, but is still suffering dearly, experiencing extreme separation anxiety. A geneticist specializing in metabolism detailed in his report that Amelia didn't receive the nutrients needed while in the womb and her bone development was markedly delayed. He noted that some of her rib fractures dated back to her first 6 weeks of life when she was still in NICU. His report also noted her fractured ribs showed cupping, a loss of calcium from the ends of growing ribs, and her spine showed generalized demineralization. This expert provided a long list of factors that contributed to Amelia's osteopenia, but the state's experts only consulted with this cap and relied on her reports rather than examining my child themselves. They failed to run thorough testing, only doing genetic testing on 2 of the most common forms of OI, or brittle bone disease, which were negative. Amelia is still having abnormal CBC labs and has been anemic since birth, even with supplements and specialized formula. But we are not allowed to see a specialist to have it looked into. The judge ordered a social study to be done before deciding on reunification. The final deciding factor in this social study ended up being a conversation had with the accusing cap. Non-reunification was recommended. The state has all of our children, and they are suffering from it. I did not realize medical kidnapping was a real thing, but we are now living it. Please, I beg you, pray for our children, pray for our family. Our children need to be reunited with their parents.